specialty law to be with us. So thank you very much indeed for doing that. Oliver was drawn into active faith initially through a love of music, which attracted him to the church's choral tradition. He's currently an incumbent in inner city Birmingham, or he was previously an incumbent in inner city Birmingham, and is now rector of the Civic Church of All Saints, Northampton, in the Diocese of Peterborough, where you've been since 2016. The Reverend Daniel Valentine is a lawyer, an employment lawyer with a successful practice in employment law, which he combines with being part-time priest in charge of St Matthew and St Mary Crumshaw in the Diocese of Manchester since 2019. Reverend Dr. Tom Wolford. Tom has a background in academia and is currently incumbent of All Saints New Longton in the Diocese of Blackburn, as well as being a tutor in theology at Emmanuel Theological College, where he's been for 3 years. And then finally, Reverend Arwen Folks. Arwen was a former Liberal Democrat councillor and considered a career in politics before being drawn to ordination. And she's been 4.5 years as rector of East Blatchington and Bishopstone in the Diocese of Chichester. So let's welcome all of them. So I'm going to start off by leading some discussion, and then we'll have a little bit of time, I hope, for questions from all of you. So perhaps if all of you could start off by telling me briefly maybe 2 or 3 of the key things that your parish has been doing locally to support the wider community, including through the COVID lockdowns and now the cost of living crisis, and just generally the tough times that everyone is living through. I think it's probably going to be easier if I just start at one end and pass the mic along.
Thank you, Prudence. So I've got 2 churches, one of which has been, is a ridiculously active church. Since I've arrived, we've been on a journey from being inward-looking to outward-looking, and then a year into that journey, shifting the culture, of course, COVID-19 happened, and actually we found ourselves with a God-given opportunity to lead the whole town response. So we ran a 12-hour telephone helpline. We engaged 300 volunteers nearly from across the whole town to be shoppers and collect prescriptions, and we did that for about a year. We ran that for a year, which was extraordinary. We just wound that up, thought we were sort of just recovering our pre-COVID life, and then the next thing that came along, we'd built up a reputation for being community leaders and organisers. So the Ukraine war happened, and so again we found ourselves leading a multi-agency partnership to actually provide services and support, and we welcomed 38 Ukrainian refugee families into the area. And then following that, of course, the cost of living. So again, we engaged with a great number of people, and we ran a network of warm spaces, our own church providing a weekly community lunch, which was amazingly well attended.
Wow, following after Arwen, I mean, we're nothing like as impressive. We're just carrying on with bog-standard, old-fashioned parish ministry, visiting the sick, visiting the housebound, working in the local primary and secondary schools, offering a chaplaincy support to the staff. We have done warm spaces. We've only got 1 Ukrainian family in our little village parish, but just carrying on the usual parish ministry that I think you probably all know and love, or at least knew and love. But yeah, I've written other things here, but collecting for a food bank, and also taking parcels of food and groceries and countries to discreetly to a few families that have come discreetly to ask for it, because it's a relatively affluent village, and to have been brought to that sort of situation by cost of living crisis is something that not necessarily want to be broadcast or generally known, or even want to go in person to the food bank themselves, but they do need the help. So we've been able to help in all that sort of way, low-key, ordinary ways.
Ordinary but extraordinary, I think.
Thank you. I first went to St Matthew's in November 2019, so I got through Advent and Christmas when my dad died. So I was off for 2 weeks. I was back at work for 8 weeks and then COVID hit. So I actually had my first PCC meeting just before COVID hit, and I discovered that nobody on my PCC was under 75. So COVID, we actually decided that we were going to try and use COVID as much as we could as an opportunity to turn our church inside out and start working outwards rather than working inwards. We changed our mission action plan to quite simply being a blessing to council, A, B, to C. And we essentially thought about how we could begin to bless the community that we were set to serve. And out of that, we've grown a food bank. We've done all of this in partnership with other local charities or community groups or the school. But out of that, we've grown a food bank, a community shop. We have a monthly lunch club. We have a children's, or we had, until the youth minister went off to another job, we had a children's after school club 3 days a week. And we've done all of that by beginning to think of our buildings as assets rather than as liabilities. And that's been the most important, I think, culture change. As well as looking outwards, it's saying, well, this building isn't it's a millstone, there are problems with the building, but it's also the biggest asset that we've got. So how can we use this building in order to bless the community? And out of that, the congregation is now growing. When I opened up again after COVID, I had 6 on my Sunday morning. And now regularly have about 35. And we've actually trebled our turnover as well. So out of some of the most awful things, good things can happen.
I arrived in Northampton just under 7 years ago now, and I inherited a church where there had been a really lavish pastoral breakdown between the former priest and the congregation. And in a civic church, when you have a pastoral breakdown, it kind of wrecks your relationships with the wider community as well. So the last priest's valedictory sermon was printed in the local newspaper, which is slightly horrifying thing to happen, really. And so one of the first things that needed to be done was repairing lots of those relationships in a town which is very reminiscent of lots of towns in Middle England, where there's a lot of economic decline, a lot of social change going on, and an awful lot of need, which rises to the surface very, very quickly. And in 2017-18, we found that things were getting to fever pitch among those who were attempting to work with homeless people and with rough sleepers. But those organisations were arguing, they were warring with the local authority, and the people caught in the middle were the very people that we wanted most to help. We've got a church building that is very, very beautiful. It's wonderful. Eddie's still here. He very kindly gave us a huge amount of money last year to repair it, and so it stands open 7 days a week for people to come and pray and do it. Apart from a little narthex where we run a cafe, there's no community space in there for us to address the social need that has gone through the roof. But what we could do is we could bring people together. We could connect people up, and we could, with the kind of the civic church hat on, go and demand a better relationship between those who were supposed to be purportedly serving their communities or purportedly running charities for the benefit of Northampton's poorest, and demand that they worked together better. We were helped by that in that the then department, the then Ministry of Communities and Local Government turned up with support workers and a huge amount of money in the shape of the Rough Sleepers Fund that almost acted as guarantors for that reconciliation process. And we were able to transform a sector that was absolutely warning. This proved to be really foundational and fundamental when we came to COVID and the COVID lockdowns, where and everybody in scheme that provided hotel accommodation to people who otherwise would have been on the streets. The local authority thought they had 30 rough sleepers. They ended up giving rooms to 120 rough sleepers. So next time your local authority tells you about the number of rough sleepers they think they have, ask them to check again. And we were able to carry on being guarantors in that relationship. Through COVID, running a music education program was very, very tricky. Touching the lives of young people when you could only really teach them to sing over Zoom was very hard. But it meant that when lockdowns were released and our church buildings were usable by the public again, that we more or less rushed into that building and put an awful lot of work into making sure that it reverted as quickly as possible to being open, to being available, and eventually being places where the song of the Lord was being sung with even greater enthusiasm once again.
Thank you. Now, in the nicest possible way, I'm going to ask you why you're here. What I mean is, what are the frustrations that you have with the current situation that have led you to believe that a campaign like Save The Parish is needed? I don't necessarily need all of you to answer every question going forward unless you want to. So who would like to kick off?
I'm here because I got really angry about the way in which money was being spent, and the way in which the money which was supposed to be supporting those people who I'm called to serve wasn't getting to them. I'll give you just one example. In the Manchester Diocese, they've just signed off, I think it's £5 million for a new resource church to be built. 7.5 sorry. For a new, they're buying an old barracks, and it's in connection with the Church's Revitalisation Trust, so essentially it's an HTP church plant. It's 400 yards away from a thriving Anglican church. And when I think of the difference that amount of money could make to the really, really desperately poor people that I'm called to serve, it makes me angry. And I want to do something about it. And that's why
When you were a child and there was one thing worse than your mum being angry, and that's when she said, "I'm not angry, I'm disappointed." So I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in the loss of confidence in the parish system, in the loss of confidence in the ordinary means of grace, word and sacrament in every parish, every Lord's Day. We've been doing that since the Church of England started. At the latest, I'll give that date as 597 AD. We've been doing it for a long, long time. Why have we lost confidence in word and sacrament parish ministry in the last generation? So I'm worse than angry, I'm disappointed.
I'm here because I'm sick to the back teeth of things coming and distracting my parish from the lay people, from all of us doing what it is we are actually called to do at grassroots. I find myself sometimes as though I'm standing in between the parish and the diocese as this sort of, I can't even describe what it is, but trying to stop the financial concerns undermining what we're doing in the parish, trying to meet the demands, the requirements of the diocese, which get ever and ever more bureaucratic. Something needs to give. And I think actually since I became on General Synod and became really aware of quite how much money is being held, and then began to pay really close attention to how that money was cascading. You know, I used to be the chief executive of a social enterprise, so I'm well used to writing funding bids and project grant applications. But yet our parish isn't shiny enough really to tap into the larger sums of money. I have a combined electoral roll of 90 and 120, so what's that, 210. And our combined parish share call on our benefits is £120,000 a year. That's astonishing. We can't meet it, so therefore we are consistently in deficit. And yet, look at what we're doing on the ground. And I'm fed up. I'm really fed up of holding the tension between these things.
I remember working in Birmingham Diocese, and I was on the Bishop's Council actually when they announced they were going to open Gas Street Church. Back when resource churches only cost £2 million and not the figure my colleague here has quoted. And I remember somebody being very excited about young clergy coming into the diocese and running new churches. And I remember thinking, well, actually, this fellow who's going to run this church is 8 years older than me. And I sort of sat there, I wondered, and I pondered, and a thought came to me, and that's that I've often felt supported and helped in the church. Even though I've been in ministry for 16 years now, but I've never felt invested in. And I think that's a really key distinction. Nowadays I work in the Diocese of Peterborough, and if there was a diocese in England where I really felt that the parish was valued, I would say it was probably Peterborough. Archdeacons are still instructed to induct people to real, actual and corporal possession of their benefices, and they do mean it, they absolutely do. But so often, I still find, and as my parish that I work in at the moment is one of the poorest in England, the poorest in the Diocese of Peterborough, and so we benefit from poorer parishes funding, and things like that, things that knock the edges off parish share that might otherwise be completely overwhelming and things like that, which we're really, really lucky to receive. So I feel helped and supported, but I don't feel invested in. And I see an awful lot of investment going on. And I kind of wonder, well, when's my turn? When is the turn of the people who have been just about coping, just about managing with the crumbs that fall from the Master's table? When do they get to put their efforts and their ministry, their hopes and their ambitions for the raising of the cross of Jesus Christ in this nation? When do they get to put those ambitions through the roof? And I think that's why I'm interested in what's going on here, because I think too many people are being helped and supported, but not invested.
So I think we probably all agree that a lot of what's at the bottom of this is related to finances and worries around declining congregations and questions when dioceses are so financially hard-pressed about how to make stipendiary clergy affordable. And one of the proposed solutions, is to make up for a lack of clergy by expanding the role of the laity, and particularly through the use of focal ministry. If there's anybody here who isn't familiar with the term focal ministry, basically what that means is that each parish has a person who is the lead person in that church, who may not be, and indeed probably isn't, in fact, a member of the clergy. So what do you think about that? And what is it that the clergy can do that even the most gifted and willing laity can't?
We're living through this in Manchester Diocese as we speak. We've been reorganised into 7 super deaneries with 7 super area deans, acronym SADs. And we've also been reorganised into mission communities, with each mission community having a mission community leader who is supposed to be ordained. All of this happened supposedly with consultation. The consultation was, which mission community are you going to be in, not are we going to move to mission communities. It has been, as far as North Manchester, where I am, is concerned, it's been an unmitigated disaster. But nobody seems to be prepared to listen to that. The issue that we have is we do not have people who have the confidence or the skill in order to do those things that they are asking focal ministers to do. So what's happening is the clergy are being spread ever more thinly in order to try to paper over the cracks. I love my congregation to bits, but I couldn't even get somebody in my congregation the other day to staple some service sheets because it was too much pressure for them. How on earth can I ask people like that to begin to put together liturgy, to even use email or the real basics of those things, to fill out a parish return, to do the paperwork that might be necessary for a marriage? Those people just simply are not there, and nobody is listening.
I'm in Chichester Diocese, and I ought to say actually, similar to you, Oliver, I think it is a diocese that really does care about the parish. Focal ministers aren't quite so on the radar there. However, my curacy was served in Truro Diocese, and I was the assistant curate of St Justin, Roseland and St Maur's, which has now been made into a huge united benefice, the Roseland, I can't remember the name they've given to it. One of the things that strikes me is that it all seems a bit upside down, because essentially what you have is an incumbent who's in their study doing all the desk work of the bureaucracy, the one who's been invested in for theological education, formation, liturgical training, and they're the one behind the desk doing all the admin, essentially, and we're training people to sort of have this huge responsibility that I think does need careful formation, careful peer support and networking. I don't want to underplay the role and potential of the lay members of my parishes. I mean, I think they're tremendously gifted people. But actually, if the incumbent is overseeing so many parishes, how can they provide the mentoring and the support that somebody does need if they're regularly standing up at the front with all the projection, the holding of that space, all the pastoral work that comes with it? It seems crazy. I really wanted to see the Church Commissioners release money that was for admin support, or to help, with building development. Those are the sorts of things that will liberate clergy, that will actually allow our parish clergy to be able to focus on the things that they are called and trained for. I think it's all a bit the wrong way round.
In Blackburn Diocese, we still feel stretched and the rest of it, but our bishops have been committed to maintaining clergy governance and have not put on any scheme for mass combining of parishes. And I don't think it's a coincidence that when the sort of league tables of the diocese for recovery of congregations after COVID, Blackburn was at the top. And you're at the bottom?
Yep.
I don't think that's a coincidence. And so I think, the church government's got its own research that shows you need clergy people in parishes. That leads to growth or to less severe decline. And just in the face of all this evidence, a lot of dioceses, including in the northwest, not just Manchester, Liverpool diocese as well in particular, are going in another direction. The evidence shows that that's the wrong idea. It's not what parishioners want, but it keeps happening.
I wonder, perhaps if when you comment, you might also say something about the effect on the sacramental life of the church.
I would be very cautious about the focal ministry plans that so many places have given. And I think if I was a layperson, I'd be very cautious as well, because looking at the history of things, lay people are the first to be employed when there's money, and they're the first to be fired when money runs out. We're really good at taking advantage of people and then kind of dropping them to kind of save the vicar in that way. And that's really very, very unfortunate. Because I think you look back at the annals and the history of the church at the moment, there was once even a fellow employed to make sure that the urchins weren't messing up the portico outside the church. Now, we long ago fired that person, but the need is certainly still there. So if we're going to make an investment in people to do things, then it needs to be long term. People need to trust that that's not going to sort of come up when it's fashionable and die away when it's not. Because these are people's livelihoods we're talking about. And trust is a really important thing for the church at the moment. Because I think we've got a real serious and significant deficit of it. We have serving bishops who say that the church is not a safe place at the moment. Because certain important intrinsic aspects of our life together can't be run correctly. So I think raising that trust is really very important. We have in many places a Eucharistic church, which is dependent on having priests and parishes who can celebrate the sacraments of our redemption. If we are going to place people in there, then we need to sort of say to them that while they're serving at this table, I think it's an act of the apostles' situation. The apostles choose the deacons so that they can serve at tables and they can be freed up for the proclamation of the gospel. If we can do this in a way that sets people free, then that's wonderful. If we do it in a way that just lays more and more responsibility on top of them, and I think that will be crushing to both the people we're employing and to the people who are becoming line managers and HR managers.
Prudence, you mentioned about the impact of the sacramental life, and actually I have strong views on this. I lead Eucharistic churches from the Anglo-Catholic tradition, and when I was in Cornwall, what I discovered across the parishes is that people are hungry for the Eucharist every week. And as this issue was was in its infancy, because that was 5 years ago that I was there, what I kept hearing said was that people needed to be re-educated, that they needed to be shown that the word was a equal, and actually their own intrinsic hunger for the sacrament was being decried as though they were wrong. And that really worries me, and I think that's part of the reason, ignoring that and not listening to actually what the people were telling the church what they really wanted, what sustains them, has led to what we've been seeing.
Right, so I think now we've got a little bit of time for questions from all of you. So who... Be gentle, says that. So who has the first one? Simon's just doing his thing. Yes, it's a hand near the back.
Thank you to all the panel members for their thoughtful insight. I just wanted to add the comment that one reason I think people do not feel listened to is that the cult of managerialism is so widespread throughout the church that if it cannot be counted, it doesn't matter. Seems to be the thing that many people say. And there are all sorts of things in our church that you cannot count. It's not a mathematics lesson. But people with their feelings and their attendance, you don't have to go to church. If you can be part of the church by living in the village, and so many people do that, but they're simply not listened to. So I think we've got to get away from the whole culture of only thinking about what can be counted, which is led by the denomination. And one further thought from that, I believe that a postcode lottery is not a term of disparagement. If good things are going to happen bottom up, they will start happening in certain areas first, and then if we're wise, we will encourage other people to follow suit.
Yes, I wanted to comment on that observation, really. There are lots of metaphors for the church in the New Testament: the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, the temple of God, the vine. Not one of them is a multinational corporation. But I think that the approach to, and we can hear words that are taken from management speak, of viability, as if closing churches is like closing unprofitable branches of M&S. This is the Church of God we're talking about, and I think you're right, there are all those things that can't be measured, plenty that can be, £55 billion worth that can be measured, but all those things that can't be. And I think I completely agree with what you said. This way of looking at church in corporate, in management ways is with measurable metrics being the only thing that can be valued, can be accountably demonstrated, is part of what drives national and diocesan policy. But we're a supernatural organisation, we're a family, we're not branches of M&S.
I agree. I think that churches do, though, need to be well managed. And it's important that they're well managed. It's important that we use the money that we have wisely. My question would be, would our diocesan structures live up to the level of scrutiny that the parishes are put to? And really, give us the money that we're entitled to and let us manage it. In Manchester, we receive as a gift £2 million a year from the Church Commissioners in link funding. And that's because of the number of parishes that we have from low socio-economic areas. And those areas, North Manchester, Salford and Rochdale, are the areas that have the lowest number of clergy. The clergy ratio is the lowest. So where is that money going? What I would say is, as far as link funding is concerned, we need something like the pupil premium, so that actually we can see that money that is destined, that the parishes receive in order to assist those in lower socio-economic areas, actually gets to those people. Give us the money, let us spend it. We know how to manage that money. Let's be proportionate, let's get the decisions made closer to the people that can really count.
I think that's exactly what I mean by being supported but not invested in. My parish area is £78,000 or something, or the poorer parishes funding knocks about £38,000 off that, taking it down to about 40 or so. Well, that was what I was paying in the first place. So that money actually doesn't exist except on a piece of paper in Diocesan House and on a piece of paper notionally if I decide to include it on my accounts. And this is part of, I think, what we're saying is that we want to sort of take this a little bit further. And we want it to be about investment, and not about a support which is so intangible as to not be able to put your finger on it.
So before ministry, I did train with the Institute of Leadership and Management. So I do know that management theory is a very helpful toolbox, but that's exactly what it is. It's a toolbox, and it does seem to have become something of an idol. And actually, if we're really going to apply management theory in a constructive way, then I think something that would be more helpful would be to have some level of service level agreement with the diocese that actually helps us to understand or access the services that we really need, instead of paying wholesale for the things above the actual clergy costs, where actually we find ourselves paying again for it. An example is, we pay for property costs. One of my parishes has just had to spend £10,000 redecorating the clergy house. I don't know quite how all that works. Who owns it? It's all a bit opaque, and I really struggle with the lack of clarity. A little bit of management theory in that direction would be very helpful and would help us to actually, as a parish, to have a better relationship with the diocese, because we would understand exactly what services we were receiving. I'm the governor of a school, and the school that I'm the governor of buys in their admin services, and they go down the list and they tick what it is that they're going to need. Now, some of those are statutory things, some of those are extra things, and then the amount that they pay for the admin cost is based on the services that they know that they're going to receive. And it concerns me that it's very opaque, the relationship with the diocese, when we are paying a considerable amount for the support services that they provide.
Thank you. I saw a hand over here first, and then if we've got time, I'll come to you, sir, but I'm not sure if we will. So over here first, please.
Prudence, shall we take two questions together out here and then?
That's a good idea. Yeah, let's do two together.
I think it's been a very valid point being made about the way management is actually operating in the church at the present time. We've gone from a situation where management was dominated by mission statements in the 90s and the early parts of the 21st century to this ESG business now, environmental, social and governance. And there's a lot going to be talked about this in the Synod in the next few days. And what this does is emphasise the need for having proper attention being paid in management to environment effects, diversity, and all these other issues which take away the value which we've talked about here of the actual parish vicar. And what is happening, in my opinion, is that the vicar, which if we run the system on the old system by mission statements, the first mission statement of the Church of England should be to bring the word of God, the cure of souls, to bring the word of God to parishioners. And it's the vicars who are the ones who are responsible primarily for doing this. The new management systems, which all the dioceses are using, are devaluing that aspect of things in favour of diversity and these other governance issues. So my view would be that we should put the vicars on the pedestal. They should be paid more than anybody in the bureaucracy associated with the diocese, perhaps not quite as much as bishops, but everybody else, certainly, the incentives should be there to get people who are good at providing mission to parishioners into the parishes to become vicars. And
I think we've got the gist of that one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. And then there's another hand just a little bit further back. Yeah.
It's Andrew Wickens again. The business about service level agreements, I take. This is by way of advice, and I can say this, I think, because I won't be reported. In the Diocese of Manchester, the parish share is being reassessed so that basically everybody pays the same for basic service, which is the sort of running of church house. So the entry level now for parish share is £9,000. The second thing is support clergy, particularly like mine, in very, very poor parishes or where they can't wipe their face in terms of income and share, because it's becoming increasingly wearing for people like me who took a substantial cut in income when I trained. I was on more than the Archbishop of Canterbury when I left my job to go to theological college. So it's not been without sacrifice, a 95% cut in income for 2 years. It's very wearing for clergy to feel in this management-led, an increasingly congregational, cost-centred led church, where a Catholic church, the rich should support the poor. What is not equitable about that, and what about that is not contained in the Acts of the Apostles? It's very wearing for clergy and for their people to be regarded as loss-making cost centres on a corporate balance sheet. So please support your clergy. Their remuneration is academic, I think, but make sure that they're not driven into the ground because of the need to have every column on the corporate balance sheet a healthy black rather than a red debit.